Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are really delighted to have you with us today for this webinar. I'm Camille Bachelet, Innovation and Partnership Manager at CELLforCURE, and I will be your host for today's session. The title of our webinar is Combining Market Access Optimization and COGs Reduction to Secure ATMP Sustainability. Before we jump into the discussion, just a few quick housekeeping points for today. First, the seminar is being recorded and will be made available on our website. Second, we will have a Q&A section at the end. Please feel free to type your question anytime in the dedicated section box. We will collect them and answer as many as we can during the final part of the session. And finally, at the end of the webinar, you will receive a short survey. It only takes 2 minutes and it really helps us improve, so thank you in advance for your feedback. Today, we have brought together two perspectives for this conversation, Marc-Olivier Mignon and Sandrine Bourguignon. Sandrine Bourguignon is the CEO of Rweality, a company from Enosium Life Science. Sandrine has a PhD in public health and health economy with over 20 years of experience as a consultant in health economics. She has developed strong expertise in supporting healthcare innovation strategy. And the second speaker is Marc-Olivier Mignon, the president of CELLforCURE. Marc-Olivier has more than 20 years in the pharma industry. He was involved in the commercialization of the first CAR T-cell on the French market, setting up from scratch with his team a totally new commercialization model. So before we dive in, Marc-Olivier and Sandrine, could you each take a minute to briefly introduce your company so the audience has a bit of context?
Sure. And thank you, Camille. Welcome everybody. So just as we start, a few words about CELLforCURE. CELLforCURE is a unique CDMO. We are specialized in cell and gene therapy and only cell and gene therapies. And the story of CELLforCURE starts with the LFB. And the CELLforCURE has been a CDMO for almost 10 years, from 2010 to 2018. And then from 2018 to 2023, as CELLforCURE turned into a facility for a major pharma company. And during those years, CELLforCURE manufactured CAR T cells on a real-life commercial setup. And so today we are bringing back CELLforCURE in a third life, back to the world of CDMO. And we are here to serve the ecosystem, French and worldwide, to help innovators to bring new therapies, new cell and gene therapies to market, to serve patients, and to serve the ecosystem.
Thank you.
And I'm also pleased to introduce Rweality. I manage Rweality, and we are a consulting firm. We are already specialized on market access. And market access is a very large story at the end. So we are talking about using data, mainly real-world data, to support market access strategy, pricing strategy, and also all the economic modeling. Based on that, the particularity of Rweality is that we are showing the value of innovation on three new pillar of demonstration. We are talking about organizational impact, social and environmental impact too. Rweality is now a part of Enosium Life Science company, which is a complete offering to support development in terms of clinical research, but also market access or medical education.
Thank you very much. So thank you for this introduction. The first question would be about manufacturing. So for Marc-Olivier, what are the best strategies to address manufacturing challenges?
So Camille, as I mentioned before, CELLforCURE has been back on the market as a CDMO for the last now 1 year and a half. And over the last, basically the last 12 months, we had interactions with about 30 innovative companies, from young startups to well-established large corporations. And basically, we also conducted more than 20 RFPs as a potential CDMO for those organizations. And based on this experience, what we've seen is that there are a lot of, I would say, insights that we have been taking, and I will try to summarize some of the largest ones. The first insight, and this is particularly true in ATMPs and especially in cell and gene therapy, is that there is a clear gap between the discovery world, which very often is academic. A lot of ATMPs are coming ATMPs are coming from the academic world. And many of them are coming from this field with a limited understanding of what it means when you move to industrial manufacturing. And this is clearly, there is one message that I would like to pass this morning. This is this one. There is an awareness that when you move from preclinical to and phase 1 to phase 2 and phase 3 and commercial, there is an awareness that this is a different world. But the consciousness about what it means and how this to be handled is unfortunately a gap that we have seen in many cases. And to say it differently, we see two types of organization. We see those who have been through this journey, who understand what it means, and we are those who are not necessarily aware and who have to go through this very steep learning curve of developing an ATMP. And the main problem, the main issue is that on top of the money needed, the investment needed to bring all these development programs, on top of the time that it requires, there is an impact on the COGs. And today, if you compare cell and gene therapies to monoclonal antibodies or small molecules, then basically the COGs is one of the major issues to bring access, to bring those therapies to patients. And the main challenge is that when you move from preclinical, when you move from your innovation process, innovation context and concept to commercial, there is the first steps, which is usually preclinical and phase 1, where you are pushed by the investors to go as fast as possible to phase 1 to make sure that you have something in your head. Unfortunately, when it's done, you already have a process, you already have the analytical strategy in place. And then when you move to phase 2 to phase 3, it becomes extremely difficult to make a change. And if your phase 1 process is not scalable or is too expensive to produce when you move to large scale, or is not practical when you go large scale, is not reproducible enough or costs a lot to be to implement the manufacturing, then basically you're stuck. And it means that you will have to go back on scratch to redevelop your process, to have to make comparative studies, or at least to bring some improvements in your process, and that will impact the COGS. So how do we think we can handle this challenge? I think for me the first and most important way to handle it is to move from awareness to consciousness, and that means that when you are moving into when you start to think about your process, when you start about moving from the discovery to the development of your process, it's extremely important that you look at the journey up to the end, so that you look at the journey up to the manufacturing phase in commercial, and having discussions very early on with CDMOs, can be CELLforCURE, can be other actors on the market, is very important, because you will really realize what it means when you will move on. The second thing is, even if you cannot afford to have a real CMC team in your early development, it's very important to have a CMC view of what will it means when your process will be at scale. Because at least you will be able to make a gap assessment, at least you will be able to understand what will be the efforts required, and at least you will also be able to assess early on what would be or what could be your comparability strategy. Another advice that we can give is to address your transition strategy early on. Clearly, and this is very fair, and I think it's a very a natural way to proceed. Usually you will do your preclinical and your clinical studies still in the academic world, in small cell labs that are fully set for a very small number of batches, and that will have the agility to help you manufacture the small number of batches for phase 1. And the cost also will be much lower and will be affordable when you are in phase 1. However, what we see and what I think is super important is that you assess your transition strategy, because usually those organizations are not able to take you through phase 3 and commercial. And it's super important that early on you assess with this partner, with this phase 1 partner, how you will move on, because you will have to move to another organization. And I think it's critical that you assess and that you put in your MSA how you will transition, that you work end in end with this phase 1 organization. And then when you move to this phase 2, phase 3 and commercial, that the two organizations work together to ensure a smooth and a cost-effective strategy. So what usually what we are talking about here, people think very much about the process, the manufacturing process, but what anyone should not forget is that as important of the process is important of quality. So the insight too is that quality is the ultimate driver. And as you know, the GMP requirements become more stringent at every stage, and some of the criteria for release, for instance, potency release criteria are indicative at the early stage of the development. But when you move to phase 3 and commercial, they become mandatory to be able to release your product. So it's very important that you have this strategy in mind and that it goes hand in hand with the process strategy. Otherwise, this will impact your manufacturing success rate, and of course, it will impact your COGs. And the way you are going to drive your specifications, and so your release criteria, your characteristics criteria, will of course drive your COGs up and down. A few years ago, the FDA had a strategy of the minimum effective dose to approve products. I think this is something to consider. What is your minimum effective dose and how far can you go in your specification from the minimum effective dose to the maximum dose that you can afford. Especially in autologous CAR T, this is particularly relevant because OS, manufacturing success rate, is a challenge, but it's getting better and better as we are selecting patients in a better way. And also as our experience is getting better. However, OS still represents a challenge for the patient, a challenge for efficacy, and of course a challenge because at this stage, OS are not paid when they are required and paid by when they are delivered to the hospital for the patient injections, they are free, and this is really a challenge. So working on your release criteria and your specifications early on is very important to avoid those kind of challenges. And last but not least, pay attention to the GMP guidelines, which are currently evolving. We're expecting a new part 4. For now, we don't really see what's going to be the change, but we see a trend to get through the closer to the NX1. But probably we will do another webinar to explain what will be the change in the next months. And then I see the time, so I'll have to jump a little bit quickly. But for me, those two insights are the more important. The insight 3 is about the automation, and here my message is very simple. Automated and closed systems bring COGS reductions because they mean less time in the manufacturing lines and potentially lower class requirements. However, there is a balance to be found between the investment required for the equipment and the fact that even with the best equipment today available, you might need to have technicians with PSCs and Class B not so far in order to be able to have the flexibility required in cell and gene therapy. If we look further to the future, today we are very much, and this is my insight 4, today we are very much into still the early phase and the early age of cell and gene manufacturing in commercial and in large scale setup. But we anticipate that this is going to move on, and we are working with our partners to make cell and gene manufacturing. I like to say that our objective is to make it reliable, boring, so that you don't have to think about it when you are the innovator, and cheap. Now, if you've been able to do this, then you can move on with your clinical program. You can move on to a registration, and then the next step will be how you get access. And for that part, I will hand over to Sandrine.
Thank you, Marc-Olivier.
Thank you, Marc-Olivier. So, Sandrine, what are the key market access barriers for ATMP?
Thank you, Camille, for your question. So maybe first of all, I would like just to precise the differences between regulatory and market access, because I saw in the keywords some point of regulatory. Regulatory is a step just before market access, which means also price and reimbursement process in different health technology assessment bodies. So it means you first have the market authorization with regulatory bodies, and then you have price and reimbursement process in different countries, we are the HTA bodies. So it's two different steps, but you also have to anticipate both. And they are generally required clinical assessments and clinical data. So all the part of the clinical development is definitely key to success in market access. So first point, we generally observed a lack of anticipation in market access because it's very far in your mind when you are designing a preclinical or phase 1 product clinical study. And then generally, we anticipate market access only at the end of phase 2 or phase 3, and it's too late to have all in your hand to success market access. So why we are really push and strongly push to anticipate market access even in preclinical and phase 1 is because it will be a pity to not have the patient or professional like physicians access to the treatment because of a barrier at the stage of market access. So we are talking about reimbursement strategy. Reimbursement strategy is in which country you will go first. It could be Germany for Europe, French, nice, for example, in the UK. But in each country, you will have to decide a strategy of reimbursements. So strategy reimbursement, we discuss comparator, for example, at the position of your treatment in terms of therapeutic position, first line, second line, etc. And also all the population, all the subgroup, and of course, the clinical outcomes you will have already decided in your clinical studies. So Marc-Olivier mentioned overall survival is key, but generally you do not have enough maturity of your data to demonstrate the overall survival. So you have only progression or some event avoid, for example. So just keep in mind that HTA bodies will challenge you about the extrapolation of those outcomes, for example. So it means you have to be able to go out only the clinical data and also to demonstrate a lot of other criteria expected by the HTA bodies. Directly linked with the reimbursement strategy, it will be your pricing strategy. And I think everyone have in mind that pricing is also revenue and that it's a key point for your funding also strategy. And here there is a paradox because your funding and funders can imagine that it could be an issue to discuss about pricing or reimbursement strategy too earlier in your development. And it's not true because if you are able to anticipate all the process, you will also leverage a lot of questions that your founder will need to be reassured about their need of investment. So it's directly linked. If you are able to support your market access strategy, you will also leverage a lot of barrier for your funding. So here it's general principle strategy, but I would like also to underline some very specific points and consideration for ATMPs. You are working on small population, so it means that you will small population for your clinical trials, but also then on the market, and it has some consequences in terms of reimbursements. It means that you will be challenging of the size of effect, for example. You will also have some challenges about comparison. Standard of care is not generally well defined, for example, or you will have very old product with already a strong evaluation. So it means you also have to anticipate, for example, indirect comparison. And it's a point added in parallel of clinical development. Second point is the data maturity, because sometimes you can go through market access process with conditional authorization market. So it means that your data and or your clinical studies are not finished, but you have enough size of effect to anticipate and go to a fast track market access. It's good for the patient. Of course, but it also means that your clinical data won't achieve all the outcomes you anticipate in the protocol. So you will have to discuss about the maturity and how you anticipate, and you will demonstrate in the future for payers that they do not keep a risk by reimbursing you earlier in the process. So the small target population and some challenges in comparators means that you have to think how you can enrich your clinical data with some, for example, real-world data that will complete the clinical demonstration. So if we can go through the rest. So I will repeat that as always, go beyond only R&D and preclinical phases. Always keep in mind where you are going to end, what is your final targets as for patients, but also for all the physicians, for example. So you have to perfectly know the economic model of your final users. Would it be at the hospital? That is, or ATMP generally is the case, but will you need a follow-up in outpatient, for example, too? What is the economic and tariff model of your final users? Because a lot of things can change during clinical development. So I understand that you can't not address all the points in clinical and phase 1 trials. So maybe you have also to prioritize some questions. For example, we generally recommended to at the clinical or phase 1 trial to start by the medical needs to ensure that your treatment will really answer to a new question, would be really an innovation, and also to prioritize and to help to select some molecules sometimes at different stage of development. When you are arriving on phase 2, it's a different question because you can also accelerate patient recruitment by a better knowledge of hospital and where are your patient based. And we all know that time is also money, so it's key to identify in the better way patient characteristics, where they are treated. Is there some center of excellence, for example, and also if you will need some other data out of the clinical data. And here, I mean, for example, external control arm or different proxy endpoint to support your clinical regulatory and pricing and reimbursement process, so all the HTA process. But you need to have all the information before starting your dossier submission, for example. And for it's really a key factor to understand all the market trends before starting the phase 2 and the phase 3. It also will reassure your investor, of course. And then, but it's very late, but when you are submitting a dossier to the H body, you also have to keep in mind that you will have to generate data during all the life of your product. And sometimes it's also good to integrate that in your dossier. So just to conclude, be also adaptable, be agile, because your strategy can change during the clinical development. It's a long journey, and new product can be co-developed. So it means that you will have to adjust maybe your clinical protocol. The environment of your users as patients, as physicians can also change. If there is change, if the urgent change, for example, if a new biomarker or testing is arriving and has to be combined with your treatment for example, the diagnosis. So stay aware about all the environment around pathology, but also users. And not the last point, but global policy could also impact your strategy. And we are at this moment in I think, turning points of the balance and the equilibrium, the balance between different regions and area. We are used that US is a key market to invest and develop ATMPs, but we are not all aware about tariff adjustments. and we are expecting what will be the real consequences of this announcement. So new paradigm will emerge in any case of these periods. So keep in mind also this point. It will impact pricing strategy in Europe, not only in US. It could also change preferences of geographical area for clinical trials, not always US and Europe, but also keep an eye on the Asia market because it will definitely change the balance between the different areas. We also still confident that regarding all the history and all the experiences in pricing and response and regulatory, your firm may become or may increase its base as the stability zone. I mean, process are still existing. We also have a strong EMEA and now a strong joint clinical assessment in place. We know what should be the price. We have encouraged for price and comparison. So I definitely believe that keep an eye on Europe because it could be the new referral, new benchmark for the worldwide strategy in market access. So just to conclude, anticipate as soon as possible in new clinical developments, but also be adaptable. So just open your eyes for market access strategy.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. So we have time for some questions. So it was a rich and insightful discussion. If you have a question, don't hesitate to write it in the conversation or in the Q&A session. If we don't have the time to answer, we will contact you later with the answer. Maybe to start the first question, from your perspective, what do you think is the most underestimated challenge in ATMP commercialization? One most underestimated.
It's a very, I wouldn't say that there is only one thing, but clearly, again, it's the COGs and the COGs and the market access challenge. Clearly are the most important, and unfortunately, because at the beginning you focus on discovery, and those questions are left aside, and they come as you move into the phase of your development. So, and the way to answer that point is exactly what I think Sandrine you said about anticipation.
Yes, and maybe to just add up, but I saw some question. It's not because it is an ATMP that it will be considered as a true innovation by HTA bodies. And we saw, especially in the French, by the French HTA body, the Haute Autorité de Santé, that some products has been evaluated with a very small level of innovation. So it impacts the price at the end. So yes, if you are an orphan drug or pediatric indication, it will be easier, but not only. So my point is really as strong outcomes and anticipates other requirements for HTA bodies.
Thank you. So we have some questions. So in Oman, what do you think is missing in Europe to have a strong ATMP ecosystem?
So that's a great question. I think what is missing is a continuum. Is a continuum from discovery to commercial. There are many actors. The level of innovation is very high. There are a lot of brains and a lot of great ideas, a lot of new cells, new types of cells, new concepts. But then you have to move from one step to the other, and there is no, I would say, fluidity around how do you help those organizations to climb the Everest that represents moving an ATMP to the market. So I think if we could make sure that from the very R&D to commercialization, we could offer to the ecosystem and to the innovators a continuum pathway with smooth transition and collaboration across the board, I think that would be a great sense for Europe. And actually, we need that because we realize that what is going on in the US, that our allies are not friends, and we need to be able to be sustainable and independent on that front.
Thank you very much. So there is still some question, but we will not have the time to answer, so we will contact you later with all the answer. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any question about manufacturing or market access, don't hesitate to contact CELLforCURE or Rweality. You have the email address just here. Thank you very much for your attention.